hopefully here the kind of theme is like not taking ourselves too seriously, feeling like it's okay to do things differently, feeling like it's okay to mess up, and if anything, like even being in quarantine mode, like we're in a survival mode, and that's kind of parenting on a daily basis anyway. We're just focused on surviving, and even if that's all we're focused on, I feel like that still means we're doing a pretty good job of parenting.
Hello and welcome to Dadsplaining, a weekly chronicle of all the weirdest, messiest, grossest, and funniest parts of fatherhood, hosted by two first-time dads. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Brandon.
And this week we are going to be talking about how hosting the Dadsplaining podcast has actually changed our approach to parenting over the years. Things we've succeeded in adjusting to our fatherhood approaches, things that we've maybe sometimes failed at, and all the lessons we've learned in between. But before we get into all of that, Brandon, if our listeners want to reach out to us with questions or comments, where could they find us?
Please give us a like or a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Dadsplaining Podcast. You can contact us directly at dadsplainingpodcast@gmail.com, and then you can check out this and every episode anywhere you get your podcasts.
Exactly. We publish new episodes every Monday morning, usually. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting platform. And we would love it if you could leave us a review, preferably
Reveal. Oh, yeah,
5
gender
stars.
reveal. Tell us about your soon-to-be-born children.
Exactly. Yeah, that too, definitely. But if you're on Apple Podcasts, drop us a rating and leave us some nice words. We would love it. Or if you could leave us a recommendation on the Facebook page or something like that. Just little things like that help us to spread the word and connect with more moms and dads all over the world. So, Brandon, what is new in the Spears household this week?
Well, it's been a weird, busy, I'm doing the air quotes. If you're watching the video, you saw it. But for those of you who are listening, month, because May brings a lot of things in our lives. We've got Mother's Day, and so that was kind of interesting, trying to do Mother's Day without the normal fanfare. We talked about my brilliant move of making my wife make her own Mother's Day. But we also tried to maintain some stuff in terms of like seeing my mom, seeing her mom, doing that. And then this also brings my wife's birthday is this month, and actually quite a few family members. My grandmother turned 94. So
Wow, 94.
shout out to her
Congratulations.
birthday this past week. And so we went to see her, but then tried to stay somewhat away. We did like one of those drive up birthdays where we like stayed on her front lawn and we were kind of near each other, but not, picnicking together, and, didn't go in the house and sit down or anything. So we tried to do our best with that, and we dropped off. Noah made some art, so we kept it cool and cute, and we just kind of had some cookies. It's like if you just did the cake cutting part of the birthday, more or less. So it's just a different way of doing things. It's not as enjoyable, but it feels like it is sometimes, just because the act of like seeing people is kind of a big deal still. And so it's been nice to reconnect. Like we've made a lot of decisions to kind of continue to be as safe as we can, but we are still allowing ourselves to see some family. And that's like our nice thing that we're doing. And it provides a really good lift. So if you're comfortable doing some things, and it's up to you, if you're comfortable, then, it does certainly brighten your day. And it feels really good. So we've done a few things like that.
Definitely. That's awesome. Yeah. And that's exactly like you said, it's a comfort level thing. It's a matter of, assessing the risks. Like I said last week, the things and the things you don't, about where people have been and what symptoms they may or may not be exhibiting and how safe everyone's being. It's a thing where even when you do decide to visit family members, you change the way that you do things. I went and saw my parents this past weekend. I mentioned that I'd seen them the previous weekend for Mother's Day, and that was our first time seeing each other in, I want to say, 8 or 9 weeks. Last week, I went down and helped my dad with some yard work, in their front yard. And it was really nice, but it's different, because you're not hugging on them as much, and you're not, having really close face-to-face conversations, and you're much more wary of, is this my water bottle or your water bottle? I don't want us drinking after each other, that kind of thing. But I think the cool thing is, where there's a weird feeling from all of that, there's also kind of a heightened excitement because it's been so long since you've seen people, that you cherish it more. You don't take it for granted the way that you used to. It's
Yeah.
in that way, it's a little more special in a way that it's never been before. And once things return to normal, hopefully we'll kind of carry on with those feelings. We'll kind of learn that lesson that, yeah, you've got to make the most of it. And you got to enjoy that moment while you're in it. Cause I mean, speaking for myself, I'm feeling that more. I'm more appreciative of, okay, this is a rare opportunity to see my parents. I'm going to live in the moment and enjoy it and hold on to those memories because, I mean, it's just weird. I don't know. I don't know what other way to say it. I think we can just kind of dig into this if you want to. This is something that we decided to talk about this week because the publishing company How to Conquer, that's based here in Atlanta, Georgia, they're the company that published the book Rule a Healthy Roost. We interviewed the author a few weeks back, Leslie Smith Grant, and they invited us to write an article for their blog. And the topic that we chose was how podcasting has affected our parenting. For better or for worse, it's definitely had an impact. And I think we've both got some unique ways that the podcast has kind of affected us over the years. And Brandon, would you like me to kick it off to you, or do you want me to kind of jumpstart
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, sure. I'll take it. I was thinking a lot about, how it's been a benefit, but also how I've tried very hard to not let it be a detraction. Detraction? To not let
Yeah,
it be a
detraction.
detractor? To not let it detract. There we go. From parenting. So I think a lot, most every week when we get together about the fact that we're making time to do this and how it's taking away from something else. And it always does bother a little bit. You think about, well, shouldn't we just go home and do some more parenting? Or in this case, we're already home, should we just go see our kids and instead do that? Or anything else. And so it's a precious amount of time that we're putting toward it, but at the same time it's been a benefit. I even just think about the fact that you and I just get together. I'm on fire today. You and I get together once a week, if nothing else. And without this show, that wouldn't be the case. We're good friends, but we wouldn't have seen each other weekly. So, I mean, that's been really nice. Just like some of those big general things I think about. So I generally just feel positive about getting to do this show, if for no other reason than we get to kind of hang out and talk about the dad situation. So that's the stuff that I like about it. Like, it just forces us to think about being dads, think about how we're feeling, think about our parenting. And we were talking a little bit before we started the show about some of the general kinds of themes, and I think one of the big themes was around preparing, actively planning, researching, thinking about what we want to do. And I think of it in kind of that same two-way approach, right? Where the show has probably helped us want to research a bit more. If we're going to bring anything onto the show, we want to have some ideas, some sources, some information, even if it's just a story or somebody else's anecdote, because nothing's a guarantee with parenting. And that's definitely true. I think if we're going to talk about it, we like to have a little bit of information, or at least have it be from our personal experience. And so we can tell you something that we've tried before. And I think that's definitely true. But the flip side is it's also made me realize what we kind of talked about last week. One of the things that I love about my wife is that she is a wonderful organizer, preparer, planner, and she's used that definitely in our parenting. She's always the first one to be thinking about, what's the way to do this? What's the way to do that? What's the approach on this? What's the approach on that? I heard about this. I heard about that. Accessing mommy groups, accessing friend groups, accessing other people, who are talking about the things that they're doing in parenting. And then she talks to me about it. And then we think about how to use that for raising our son. So I think that's the benefit here, is that we've done some things that have nothing to do with the show, and we've just prepared and we've thought about it and we've researched it because we wanted to as parents, and then we bring it onto the show. So it's almost more like the show benefits from us just doing the parenting thing. And then at the same time, because we have the show, we have also thought about, what do we want to bring to the show? Yes, we'll bring some of our experiences to the show, but we've also probably talked about a lot of topics that we might never have talked about. We've interviewed a number of people. We would have never spoken to those people. We would have never gotten their experience and gotten their information. And so I think it's just been a really neat blend. And what I like about it is that it could have been a distraction, but it hasn't felt like a distraction. It's felt like a benefit to me. But at the same time, it's, I don't know. There's just kind of this thing. It's always pulling at me of thinking about the show and not letting it be a distraction. And so I think because of that, it hasn't been. I think we've done it really well. Some weeks I walk into it and I think I haven't prepared one bit. I'm just gonna let you guys know. A lot of weeks don't prepare one bit. Sometimes that magic, of the moment works great. Other times I feel underprepared. But sometimes I write it off as, well, if I'd prepared, I would have spent that time doing the show and not parenting. So I don't know. I get to use it both ways to my advantage. And I think that's the key to parenting. Just have it both ways, as long as both ways are your way. So that's one of my starting salvos for this episode, is that no matter which way you slice it, I'm doing the right thing.
That's perfect. I love it. Well, what's kind of cool about what you just said in terms of not always preparing, I mean, it's true both in our parenting lives and in our podcasting lives. But to be honest, I kind of like it that way because we're actually having a conversation and we're reacting to each other in real time, the way that, real life is. I mean, I don't know if you've listened to some podcasts that are completely 100% scripted and kind of overproduced ahead of time. I mean, I've stopped listening to some podcasts, even when the content is interesting, just because I'm listening to these people speak and I'm like, there's no way they're friends in real life. There's no way that they have any interest in what they're talking about. They're just reading lines. Like if I wanted that, I could just go to Wikipedia. But it's a little more natural, kind of the way that I feel like the way that we do this every week. You do a little preparation and then you just kind of vibe with it. And I mean, sometimes we're like that as dads, you do a little research, you do a little fact finding, and then you just kind of play it by ear. I do the same thing that you're talking about doing. And that is one of the big things that's kind of changed in my parenting life is the level of research that I do and the degree to which I inform myself about things. The stereotype of dads is that we don't want to ask for directions. We don't want to read the instructions. We just kind of want to do it ourselves. And I'm not saying that dads are naturally like that, because I don't think anyone is naturally like anything. But I think that when society expects you to be that way, you kind of just fall in line with it. And I think that what being on this podcast has kind of made me do is dig a little deeper than maybe I thought I would have to. Each week we're talking about different subjects and I'm informing myself. I mean, sometimes it's primarily so I don't sound stupid on the podcast. But then that has kind of the cool side effect of, okay, now I know that because we decided to pick that as a topic. Like now I have a better understanding of why a child has a meltdown or why they, have different phases and, the right way to change a diaper and to, wrap them in their swaddle, back in those infant days. At the same time, the balance to that is realizing that you can go too far with it and you can over Google and you can absorb too many sources. And I think that's something that we've kind of adapted to over the course of the podcast is balancing it where you collect the information and then you weigh that against what you know and what you've experienced in your own lives. Like we talked about breastfeeding before and how a million different people will tell you a million different things about, is it better to breastfeed or to give formula? And if the baby's not taking to it, what could that mean? And what could the risks be? And at the end of the day, it's like, what is best for you is what's best, what's best for the kid. And I think that that's kind of applied to in all situations, kind of that we're learning to do anyway, is do the research, but then kind of temper that with some common sense and what you're seeing in front of you. I'm not always good at that. Sometimes I'll underprepare or overprepare. But at least that's kind of what I'm striving for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a general feeling once you kind of get in the game, hopefully, you might feel this way because I think it takes some of the pressure off that you won't get it right. And you can't research your way out of it and you can't prepare yourself for most of it. There are
Mm-hmm.
some things that you can have prepared and it will help. That's totally true. You should have some ideas of how to respond to situations just so you have different things to try because you don't know what's going to work. But I think that's a wonderful part of this process. And another aspect that I've enjoyed of the combination of doing the show and parenting at the same time is just realizing that I'm doing it different from you. You're doing it different from me. We're doing it different from that guy. We're doing it different from that guy. And I just like the aspect where we get other people's stories, or we hear what they're doing, and hopefully they like that they hear what we're doing, just because it doesn't even have anything to do with, oh, what Brandon said is the right way to do it. What Jesse said that week, that's the way to do it. It's really just about talking about a way that we tried something. Here's what happened to me. That's the part that I think is powerful about stories, about talking to people, about why we like listening to other people, probably on their podcasts, is just to kind of hear the experience. And
Mhm.
that's part of it. Is this show is nice because we are talking about a shared experience. It's fun to have people comment, on our social media pages, or send us an email or leave us a review, just because that's the only way we hear, like, oh, my child is doing it this way, or my child did this today. And I hear that and I'm like, that's never happened to me. How
Yeah.
cool is that? Whether it was a cool thing or not, just because, it's different. I think that's another area that I've enjoyed about parenting in general, and this show, is just that I don't have to feel bad about the fact that me and somebody else are doing it in completely different ways, or that we've never experienced the same things somehow. Or even if we have kids that are the same age, they're totally different. We have totally different daily routines or plans about the routines. But the thing that I feel about parenting is just that if I see somebody else parenting, generally I just think they're doing it right, and that's my inherent belief. And however they're doing it has doesn't have to have any bearing on how I'm doing it, unless there's something that maybe they've experienced that I haven't, or maybe that they're feel like they're doing a little, doing well, and it's an area that I'm struggling with, and maybe then I just want some more ideas of ways to try it. But I don't know. I feel like that's been a positive, is that it almost feels like it takes pressure off, because my goal here isn't to be right. My goal is to just kind of experience parenting, share the information, hear some information. And whenever I hear from somebody else's perspective, I generally just think, oh, wow, that's cool. Did you hear how so and so did it? Or, oh, that's interesting. Their kid is interested in this. I've never even tried that with my kid. Or, my kid hates that. We'll never do that again. And it just, in some ways, it doesn't matter. And I think that's kind of the cool part about it. I don't know. I hopefully here the kind of theme is like not taking ourselves too seriously, feeling like it's okay to do things differently, feeling like it's okay to mess up, and if anything, like even being in quarantine mode, like we're in a survival mode, and that's kind of parenting on a daily basis anyway. We're just focused on surviving, and even if that's all we're focused on, I feel like that still means we're doing a pretty good job of parenting.
Absolutely. It's the way I like to think about it is it's given us kind of a healthy dose of perspective from both directions. There's kind of a new balance, at least that I'm trying to strive for, where the more we learn each week, the more we realize we don't have all the answers. Oh, I did not know that. It kind of humbles you a little bit to where you realize, okay, I'm not the expert on this. There are people that I should listen to. And then at the same time, it kind of helps us go easier on ourselves when we realize that, no one's got the answers. And yes, we're going to mess up and we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay, because that's how you learn, really. And the fact that we're learning and that we're trying, I mean, that's a positive. That's all you can really ask for, in life. And it's just, if we weren't intentionally thinking about fatherhood every week, if we weren't intentionally putting our heads together and thinking, okay, what can we turn into an interesting half hour to an hour long episode, would we be having these thoughts? Would we be putting a critical eye on our parenting? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But it's definitely made me more aware of what I'm doing as a dad. It's made me more intentional, I think is the word that one of our previous guests used, intentional fatherhood, where you're actually thinking about it. It's not all just instinct. Instinct plays a big part of it, but you're thinking about it too. There's kind of a cool balance. It's like, okay, I'm doing okay. I'm not the best. I'm not the worst. I'm somewhere in the middle, and that's totally fine. And on that same note, it makes me realize that, we give some pretty good advice most of the time, but we're not always good at following our own advice. And it's made me more aware of that, and made me kind of focus more on, okay, if this is what I'm telling people to do, maybe I should try it myself, instead of just spouting it and then moving on to the next thing. So that kind of awareness, I guess, of who we are as dads is something that I might not have had if we didn't decide to do this. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of what I enjoy is coming in with an episode where what I want to talk about is just the fact that I had no idea what I was doing for a situation.
Yeah,
And the end result of the story, if you listen to those episodes, is still don't have any idea what I'm doing. And I just kind of want to come on and talk about how hard it was. Sometimes I do feel motivated to do that because we have the show. So I'll say a nice element of it is I do sometimes think about the show in a sense of, oh, I should talk about this because maybe somebody else will benefit from just hearing how I felt about it. And it has nothing to do with advice. It just has to do with my advice for that instance is, hey, I went through this. It sucked. I didn't figure it out. I don't know what I'm doing. It was very challenging. It continues to be challenging. So I think we've had a couple of those episodes where sometimes we just come in with the premise of just being like, it's been hard out there, or here's where we messed up. And the solution is something that we don't have for you. We don't have a solution for you.
true.
So I do think about the show in that way sometimes of, maybe it's me projecting, but I just feel like it's nice to know that other people are struggling sometimes. There's a common element in humanity there. So sometimes I do like to use this show just to talk about the tough struggle because that's just what it is. And we can't just be too advicey
Yeah. No,
about it.
absolutely.
It would be weird if we were just like, we're Jesse and Brandon. We're all about we're all about the dad advice, and it'd be a
Yeah.
little too generic and too fake.
Yeah, well, definitely. And we're talking about fatherhood with other dads, especially with each other, than maybe we would have otherwise. I mean, I know that, there are daddy groups, that meetup groups and stuff where you can meet up with other dads, or, if you're part of a church or something there, you can meet with other dads too. But I mean, as an adult, especially as a young parent, it's not always easy to find people in the same phase of life as you that you could talk about stuff with. Or if you do, you work with them, and maybe it's hard to kind of broach the subject at first. But here we are every week, we're actually talking about dad stuff, all the things that we're excited about, all the things we're afraid of, the things we don't know, how we're feeling week to week, and then hearing new dad stories. I mean, that's been probably my favorite part of the show, and something that I hope we can do again as soon as possible, is getting new parents to come on and reminisce about, like, what was the pregnancy like? What were you thinking the whole time? What was the birth story? How freaked out were you? How much sleep have you been getting? It's stuff that, like, I think we're realizing more and more. Exactly. More and more these days, we're realizing that it's okay to talk about this stuff, and it's actually really healthy and really helpful, to let it out and, express yourself and, really focus on those things. That's, I don't know, that's been really super cool to me. If it weren't for the podcast, I don't know that I'd have that many opportunities, and I'm just really grateful for that.
Yeah, something I just thought of. There was an interesting comment somebody made in a review. This was a while back, and they referenced that sometimes on the show we talk about the stereotypes and how sometimes we almost plug the stereotype too much, maybe. And you made me think of it. This isn't, you didn't do anything wrong, Jesse, but you just happened to mention this is the dad stereotype, and you were talking about it, and that made me think of that comment that one of our listeners mentioned, where they kind of said, hey, you talk a little bit too much, or we focus a little bit too much on the dad stereotype, that's maybe of the past, of like dads being disinterested, dads being not big in the role of parenting, blah blah blah. And I think that was a fair point, or at least that was a good point for me, and it just reminded me that we maybe talk about the stereotype too much, because what we're actually trying to do with this show and what we're really here for is, like, we're not a part of whatever that stereotype used to be, or at least that's not what we're striving for. We're striving for dads are just all in, and that's our base assumption. And we talk to people and they're of the same mind, and I don't know, maybe we're just somehow the only listeners we find are a part of the same echo chamber for us. But I think what I have been finding, and I will say both in my actual life and on the podcast life, is that most of the people we interact with are dads who are all in, and the thought, they don't talk about a big struggle of like, ooh, was I going to be a dad? Was I going to be an active dad? They're just like, this is my kid. This is what I'm doing. This is how all about. I'm struggling, but we all struggle. Here's what we're doing. I love doing it. And so that's been really nice. I think that's part of, again, the show, and the intent behind it is that we're just coming in with the assumption that people want to be all in. We're all in. Even outside of the show, I've been experiencing that a lot. So I think we maybe don't give credit to the fact that the stereotype isn't what it was. Maybe the stereotype is shifted, and even just, we don't need a stereotype. We can just come in and just talk about the fact that this is what we're about. A lot of dads are just like this and or want to be like this, and that's cool.
Yeah, I think so. And I remember that comment that we got, and the way I felt about it was, I think the stereotype is, it's not so much that dads are, by nature disinterested, and that's okay, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And I think the point that we've been trying to make, and sometimes we fail at it, is it's like a vortex that we're trying to pull ourselves out of. And it's not because it's in our nature. It's because that's just kind of the way it's been for generations and generations, is that it's okay. Dads get the excuse to come home at the end of a long day, kick off their shoes and watch TV while mom is chasing the toddler around the house. What we are trying to say is that's not okay. We're not always good at it. We're not always good at jumping in, but we're making an effort. And we're probably making improvements over generations past in how involved we are. And then I think the other side of that coin is, a lot of times we don't know things and we do things wrong. And I think that something that you and I say a lot on the show is, well, the mom jumped in and just naturally she knew what to do because moms are awesome like that, and dads are not always awesome like that. And I think what we're trying to say is, moms have had that pressure, the entire time, to be that know-it-all parent that knows what to do and jump in and do it. And dads have had the excuse. And what we're trying to say is, guys, there is no excuse. You need to jump in there and you need to learn what to do, and forgive yourself when you make mistakes, for sure. But it's like we're playing catch up now. Now that we're realizing that it's important for dads to be in there and to be involved and to be intentional. Don't give yourself the excuse, but realize that we have to kind of recognize when we don't know the answers, and it's okay, but that doesn't mean that you can just sit back and relax, I guess is kind of the point. That's kind of leading me to the last thing that I wanted to talk about, in the parenting space, of how I've kind of adapted and grown a little bit. And in part, it's because of things that we've learned on the show, is kind of in the space of empathy with our kids. We talked about this, it was probably about a year ago, and it's probably time for an updated episode on the topic of meltdowns with toddlers. My son, David, is 2.5 now, and the meltdowns that he is having are on a level that I could not have even imagined a year ago, over things that I would think are not a big deal. They are a very big deal to him. If I want him to, get on the potty or something like that, and he doesn't want to, he wants to play with his blocks. I mean, it could result in rolling around on the ground, flailing his limbs, flailing his head until he hits something, screaming and crying. He came home from daycare the other day with a giant rug burn on his forehead because I think one of the kids took a toy from him and he had a complete tantrum and was rolling around on the carpet until he gave himself a carpet burn. But what I've realized, and mostly it's because I had to do some research for that episode we did last year, is that there's a reason that kids do this. There's a reason that they act out in these ways. And it's mostly because they don't know what's going on. They barely know what they want. And once they do know what they want, they don't know how to communicate it because they barely speak. And kind of the comparison that I came up with is, imagine if you were dropped into another country where you didn't speak the language and you had to ask for the things that you need. You had to ask for food, you had to ask for shelter, that kind of stuff, but you don't know how to do it. And anytime you try to do it, the people that you're talking to don't understand you and they give you something else instead. Eventually, you're going to get very frustrated, and understandably, you might act out in ways that are maybe not very productive. So it's made me kind of be more patient and try and understand, like, what is my kid trying to communicate to me? If he's having a meltdown, what is he frustrated about? And he's still not quite at that age where I can have those conversations with him, but I'm leaning more in that direction when I talk to him. And I'm thinking more about those kinds of motivations in my interactions with other people too, with family members, with coworkers, trying to get into their head. If you're acting in a way that I don't like, why are you acting that way? Maybe you're not happy about the situation either. And maybe that's just a response to that. And maybe I just need to be a little more patient and get to the bottom of that. And then I can get what I want. Because I think the takeaway there is, if you practice that empathy, and a couple of our guests have told us that before, it'll actually work in your favor in the end. Because if you act based on trying to get to a shared goal, you're going to come away with what you want, and you won't have to fight so hard to get it. So I'm not always good at that. I'm human, and there are times when I'll just throw my hands up in the air and be like, okay, dude, David, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to give you. I don't know what you're talking about. And it can be very frustrating, but I'm leaning in the direction of being more understanding, and at least trying to figure out, okay, he's growing, he's changing. He may backslide, he may make a mistake tomorrow that he didn't make today. Behavior that I thought he'd grown out of, he will come back and do again. And I guess I'm giving him more time and space to do that. And it helps. I think it kind of takes the stress out of it a little bit sometimes,
Welcome to the parenting cycle.
Exactly.
Figure it out, you lose it, you try to figure it out again.
Definitely. It's not always a linear path. And as soon as you solve one problem, another problem comes along, and the solutions that you learned for the last problem don't always apply to the next one. So, and there's a million other things. Like, if we wanted to, we could go into each and every episode we've talked about and things we've learned. But the truth is, we talked about things in previous episodes that I can't even remember, because I wasn't good at the time in being present in that moment and applying those takeaways to my own life. Like, we don't always do that. As I said before, we don't always practice what we preach. And sometimes at least in my case, it comes back to bite me, where I say, oh man, we talked about this 6 months ago. And if I just applied what we had talked about back then, I could have avoided being in this mess. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack, and we don't necessarily have time to unpack all of it. But overall, I think it's kind of made us better dads, being in a podcast about parenting. I don't know, for better or for worse, it's leaning towards the better. What do you think?
It's not made us worse, so therefore we will keep doing it, everyone. You're welcome.
Exactly. So that'll do it for this week's episode of Dadsplaining. Hopefully you were able to take away some takeaways. And if not, hey, hit us up. Tell us what we said that was right or wrong. Brandon, where can our listeners do that?
Give us a like or a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Dadsplaining Podcasts. You can email us directly, dadsplainingpodcast@gmail.com, and then you can check out this and every episode anywhere you get your podcasts.
Exactly. So next week, we will talk about one of two things. I may try and get my wife on to the show. She is, as I've said in previous episodes, a human resources and information specialist, and she deals a lot with benefits. So there's a lot of information that she's got to share about the benefits and time off side of having a baby in the pregnancy process, and some things that you may be able to take advantage of that you might not be aware of. So we're going to try and do that. But if that doesn't work out, we might actually revisit the subject of tantrums and meltdowns and what that is like when you've got a toddler, screaming in the middle of Target. And we might have some advice on how to handle it, or we might just commiserate with each other about how impossible it is to manage.
I've already got it. We're going to call it Tantrums Take 2 Boo-hoo.
There you go. And the boo-hoo is coming from us as well as from the toddlers. So tune back in next week for that. Until then, I am Jesse.
And I'm Brandon.
And hey, Brandon, what do you call a garbage bag full of money?
Oh, a wonderful surprise.
Yes, but you also call it a hefty loan.
The hefty bag. I see. Yes. Okay. Wow. Well, that's a thinker.
All right, folks. We'll see you next time.
The advice and opinions expressed on Dadsplaining are solely those of its hosts and guests and should not be substituted for the advice of professionals. If you have a serious concern about the health or development of your child, please consult with your pediatrician. If you're experiencing an emergency, please call 911. Don't listen to us. We're really just good for dad jokes. If you're enjoying Dadsplaining, you might enjoy this other podcast from our friends here at WSB Radio.
Hello, friends. This is Jared Yamamoto from the Power Pod, and we are a weekly recap show where we cover the current events of the week. And of course, during these times, COVID-19 is on everybody's mind. We will cover the good, the bad, and the ugly regarding this crisis. We will be serious with the coronavirus, but we will also find ways to have fun with it as well. So be sure to check us out Saturdays from 11 to noon and Sunday mornings from 9 to 11 on 98.7 FM and AM 1340 WGAU, or grab the Power Pod podcast on any of your favorite podcast providers or your favorite smart speaker.